So, following up on that discussion about Christian ethics, I had an interesting conversation with my wife, Lilac, and I was telling her about our podcast, and she watched it. And when we were discussing, the right and wrong of, for the example that we were using was telling lies. So, David and Jonathan basically cooked up this lie and told Saul, and so we were talking about that, and she followed up with a really good, I think, a good question. And she was just like, "Well, don't you think it's a slippery slope? So you start to tell a lie for a good thing, like they were preserving David's life, by the lie that they told Saul, and but a slippery slope because aren't you then tempted to keep finding reasons to tell lies?" So she's like, "Well, this time I told a lie about saving a life. Next time, telling a lie that's, not quite that serious, that are smaller stakes. And I think that's what we see in this chapter as we get into it is that's what David is doing. He's just like, now he's telling lies that are where truth probably would have served better. So, yeah, as we get into it, I think that'll be a really interesting discussion.
This is Living the Faith, proclaiming Christ from creation to consummation.
I jumped the gun. I'm sorry.
I'm Travis.
I'm sorry.
I'm Hardy.
And this is where we normally have the intro, but we're just going to get into it.
You thought that was recorded because
Yeah,
we
it
do the
wasn't.
same thing, but it's actually not. We do that every morning.
And then when Josiah
Fresh
jumps
and
the
new.
gun, you notice.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, we're reading. Hardy's about to start reading in 1 Samuel 21, and following 1 Samuel 20, where we recall that David and Jonathan had a little powwow about how to see if Saul, kind of test the waters, as they say, to see if Saul was out to kill David, which we kind of already knew that, but they wanted to make absolutely sure. So they devised a plan. Jonathan went to Saul, said what he said to Saul, and then it was made clear to Jonathan that Saul was actually out to kill David. And then Jonathan reported back to David, and David has left the scene. They renewed their covenant and of faithfulness to each other, and then departed. So
David has left the building.
He has, yes. So Hardy's going to get started here in chapter
All right.
21.
21. Now David came to Nob, to Abimelech the priest. And Abimelech was afraid when he met David, and said to him, "Why are you alone, and no one is with you?" So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business, and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you, or what I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place. So therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found.' And the priest answered David and said, 'There is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread. The young men have at least kept themselves from women.' Then David answered the priest and said to him, 'Truly, women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy. Bread is in effect common, though it was consecrated. The vessel this day.' So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but showbread, which had been taken from before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg, Edomite, chief of the herdsmen, belonged to Saul. David said to Ahimelech, 'Is there not here on hand a spear? For I have brought neither sword nor my weapons with me. Is the king's business haste?' So the priest said, 'This sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it. There is no other except that one.' And David said, 'There is none like it.' Then David rose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? Now David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them, pretended madness in their hands, stretched on the doors of the gate, and let his saliva fall down on his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, Look, you see the man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?
Right on. Nicely done, Hardy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as you can tell, we are chomping at the bit to get into this
Yeah.
chapter.
Hardy, what stood out to you in this passage?
That's our standby when we don't have anything to say.
Oh, man. Josiah mentioned that there was a progression here with deception. Now, it was noted, and I agree that in the last chapter, in order to save David's life, they had to deceive Saul. But in that scheming, it kind of set a precedent, and I think the problem is that David started relying on his own ability to scheme in order to save his skin. And it worked in the past, and that's kind of what we do as humans, is that we try a thing, and when it works out the way that we want, we do it again. And so that's the natural way of kind of how the brain works.
Like Abraham when they went down to Egypt, remember? And then he was just like, well, just say that, my wife Sarah's my sister. And then didn't he do it twice?
Yeah.
Or was it
Twice.
Yeah.
Isaac?
And then
who did
Isaac
twice?
did
It was
too.
Pharaoh,
Okay.
and then it was that other guy. I forget.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
some-
one guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, that one guy.
I forget. But anyway,
Cool. Yeah, it's a good point.
Well, the thing is that not to just go all the way to the end right away, but we see where he ends up. In scheming, what he does is he lies to the priest. Now the priest, in effect, was the spokesperson of God. So, in effect, David was lying to God, and that's how that would have been taken back then, because the priest was the go-between for the people and God. The priest would teach the law to the people, and he would go before God for the sins of the people and offer sacrifices. And so there's that's actually a pretty big deal. Also, there's a note in there at verse 7 too. This guy Doeg was there, who was a servant of Saul, and he sees all this, and that's going to come into play in the next few chapters, with the ramifications of that. How even though David is trying to sneak around, it's actually not going to work out so well. Now, I don't want to get down on him because he is running for his life, but the thing is that it's better to tell the truth and trust God with your well-being. And for this chapter, that's just not being done, and he ends up in the enemy camp, in the ancient enemies of Israel, the Philistines. Gath was the capital, Achish was the king, and that's where he ends up. And he's got Goliath's sword. And so the last time they saw that sword was when Goliath took it out to battle. And so it's like, I don't know why. It's where you end up when you end up trying to do things on your own. This is a picture of what happens when, a follower of God tries to revert back to their own devices, I believe. And he ends up in the enemy's camp, acting like an idiot. And I think God's the source of wisdom. And I think that's there is a pattern there that the more you veer off from the truth, if you are a believer, the more your mind and your heart gets like dulled to what the truth is and what wisdom is. And here he's acting like an idiot, even though he's not. At the end of the chapter. But we'll see next week, actually, where that all ends up. I pretty much just summed up the whole thing.
Yeah. One thing that I was kind of thinking about is within the Bible, you see a lot of like transition periods that as you're reading it are like almost instantaneous, but there's like time gaps that we don't realize. And so like with David and Goliath, when he got that sword probably could have been sitting there for a couple years, potentially, at least months, but probably it could have been a couple years, because it seems like David is a little bit older, more mature, has a following of men with him. I don't know the exact time, but there at least was some time. But as you're reading it, it seems like days that it was there. And I was the reason why this is sticking out is because I was watching a video the other night on the route of the Exodus, and I was talking to Hardy about this. We think of like Mount Sinai, where it says that Moses walked up to the mountain, and then there was fire on the mountain, and then Moses walked back down. It is a very tall mountain and very hard to walk up it with how stony it is. It is like in the heat of the day, and the size of it, the height of it. I mean, you're gonna be exhausted going up and down. And so it took time to get there. It took time to do things. Everything there is just, it's different than how we perceive it when we read the Bible. And so like even Goliath's sword, you got to imagine, it wasn't just a sword that David could strap onto him. The proportion was a lot bigger than a normal sword. So it's not like it was just grab this, hold it with one hand. I think it gave the size of the sword, right? I know it did with the spear. The spear was huge.
Yeah.
But just something to think about. Like the Bible doesn't give an exact time every time, but the time indicators, the difference. Something to keep in mind, like researching and going through the landscape, the geographical landscapes, helps you to picture more exactly what's happening in this time, understanding the distances between from Nob to Gath, how long that could have taken. There's all those the time to get there. They were traveling on foot most likely. So I think from like Bellingham to Linden, I think takes like 8 hours to walk there or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it probably was at least that distance or a lot more to get to places.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so, yeah, I'd made a statement earlier talking about that question of the slippery slope of lies and that kind of thing. And I made a statement that truth, he told a lie when truth probably would have served him better. And I think that's really true. He was running from the possibility that Saul was chasing him. He didn't have any concrete evidence. Like, he knew that Saul was out to kill him for sure, but he wasn't, he didn't know that, Saul was coming after him for sure. And then so the unfortunate thing is that his lie ended up causing the death of this priest. We'll find that out later, but it's really sad because, this guy, who's the great grandson of Eli, by the way, this what's his name? The priest's name, Abiathar or something like that. Ahimelech, or yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So he's Eli's great grandson, probably. Yeah, and not probably, it's for sure. But anyway, so he told a lie that ends up getting this guy killed. And you think about David in his later life, like that must have really weighed heavy, I'd imagine. David died at the age of like 70, and 70's not super old, and then yet it says that he was like full of years, It's just like, it reminds me of that old Harrison, wait, what's his name? Han Solo, what's that guy's name?
Yeah.
Harrison Ford. Says it's not the years, it's the mileage, and I think that's really true. Because he lived a hard life, but and I think there's a lot of regrets there too.
Wouldn't Abimelech dying also be part of God's prophecy to Eli that his descendants wouldn't?
That's true. Yeah,
inherit?
Probably.
Yeah,
they were gonna get cut off.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, crazy. But I was thinking on that, and what could David have done instead? Now I wanted to bring up a couple points. One, Old Testament. Even if David had killed someone, and he was running from the relative of that person, if it was a accidental death or it wasn't premeditated, we see in Exodus 21 there's other passages that go more into depth, but that one's talking about violence. And if someone kills someone out of not premeditated or anything like that, he could run to one of the sanctuary cities. And these cities were not like our sanctuary cities. They were places where the Levite priests and that kind of stuff, they had these cities given to them by God to be refuge cities for a person who had committed an offense, whether like unwillingly or willingly, and they could go there and basically be protected from the avenger of blood. So like if the relative is coming after them, now that didn't work if you purposefully did it. It's not how protection under any circumstance. It's if it was not premeditated, it was somehow an accident or something like that. But the relative is still trying to kill you for it. So you go to these cities, you take hold of the horns of the altar, and you basically plead for God's mercy on that. And then the high priest would shelter you, and you came under his protection and authority, and no one was allowed to harm you. Now, that being this case, if Saul did come, I think it would have been better for David to trust God in that circumstance, because what just happened 2 chapters ago, you remember that Saul pursued David with the intention of killing him, and he pursued him to Ramah, right? And where Eli was, not Eli, what's his name? Samuel. And he had every intention of apprehending David. And then when he himself got there, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and Saul prophesies instead. And all the people who he sent to kill David and get him and capture him and all that kind of stuff, they all prophesied. And so, like, I think David did the right thing by going to the priest, because that's like, that's God's man on earth, but he did a bad thing by lying to him, because that ended up getting him killed, when he should have just trusted God that, okay, I'm here under God's protection, and if Saul tries to kill me, even if he comes face to face with me, he's not going to be able to do it. God's Spirit's going to come upon him, and he's not going to be able to do it. So, I think that slippery slope is not treating David great.
There was that I had forgotten about that, how the Spirit came upon Saul and the guys that he sent after David. And so David did kind of have that chance to, it's like, okay, well, I can trust God. I don't have to scheme, to protect myself, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing I noticed is verse 4. When it's talking about David eating the showbread, technically the showbread was to be before God, and then after they were to put fresh bread there, and that was to go to the priests, and the rest of it was supposed to be, I think, burnt up. Do your own research on that.
I think you're correct.
I think that's the case. I can't remember, but basically, it was holy. It was only for people who were consecrated for the service at the temple, Levites. But Jesus mentioned this in Matthew. So he was with his, in Matthew chapter 12. He was with his disciples, and they were walking through this wheat field, and they were kind of, how when you're a kid and you go past the grass and you kind of get and you grab the kernel and you go like, and you get all the seeds off of it, and then for the most part you just lick them. Well, what the disciples were doing is they were going by and they were snacking on it, and so they come up and they say, "Hey, why are your disciples doing Sabbath? They're working on the Sabbath. They're breaking the law." And don't you remember what David did when he and his men were hungry? They ate the showbread, and Josiah's showing you the scripture, right? But I'm just and he was making the point that he's Lord of the Sabbath. And the thing is that Jesus also makes a point that one time he heals on the Sabbath as well. And they had a problem with that. And he says, is it right to do good or evil on the Sabbath? And they say, well, it's right to do good. This is a different time, but there was these 2 times on the Sabbath where stuff happened, and they were like, "Oh, you're breaking the law." And Jesus, like, it's not about that. And when it came to the Sabbath, Jesus, one of the things he said was, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God set aside a day of rest so that people didn't work themselves to death, and so
and distract themselves from God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because that's what can happen. You can get so caught up in your work that you end up that ends up becoming your life, what you live for.
Yeah. I've known a few guys who work 7 days a week, and I have yet to find like a family, that's working properly, and where like the wife and the kids are all going to church on Sunday, and the guy's off working. It's just like, it doesn't happen because, they're all following Dad's example, and so they're probably active and that kind of stuff, and so he's kind of setting the tone, So it's wisdom to set aside a day. But
yeah, but anyway, so what was going on here? It was God actually. He's gracious, in the case of someone's well-being, the bread was made common, and there is the fact that these guys they hadn't, it says that they were holy because they hadn't been with women for like 3 days, and so they were set apart, and so the priest was like, okay, well, since you're kosher, you can have the bread. But yeah, the spirit of the law, the letter of the law, it's about people's well-being. God set down the rules that he did for life, for people's well-being. Don't lie, don't deceive each other, don't cheat each other, don't murder each other, because we're made in the image of God. And so he sees us as something that he made holy, that we have made ourselves unholy by sin. But God is always wanting people to repent, and he is wanting to redeem, and he is wanting to forgive. But he's also perfect, and so there's the need for sacrifice. And here we have David at the temple, the place of sacrifice, receiving the mercy of God in the midst of lying to God. And I hear people talk about a difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, but here you see sin and mercy, and grace, because here was a need that probably wasn't necessarily deserved, but it was needed, and God gives it. Paul mentions, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. But on the note of sacrifice, we know that in the New Testament, Jesus became our final sacrifice for sin. And the remedy for it is the same as it was back then. It was repentance. A repentance before God and putting our faith and our trust in him. Back then, it was looking forward to a Messiah. Now we look back to what he did, but we look forward to glory with him. And so, in a sense, we're looking forward. We're also looking back to our redemption. And so it's different for us. But
yeah, that's really good.
You got any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, just I got sidetracked, but I thought it was so cool. That passage that we were looking at out of Matthew. So the problem in the Pharisees' eyes were that the disciples were picking heads of grain as they were walking along, and that's like, in terms of work, that's like the least amount of work possible to do. And then so they object to it. Jesus lays out kind of the spiritual thought process, of what God had intended with the Sabbath. He's just like, well, look at David. He was hungry and God provided for him, and then he follows that with the greatest example of violating that work prohibition. And he says, do you not know that, have you not read in the law that the priests in the temple, now they're working all day long. Like it was heavy work. You had to slaughter animals. You had to, gut them, clean them, the whole 9 yards, offering sacrifices, doing the whole thing. Yeah. Like that's a heavy day of work. That's the greatest example of violating that work prohibition. And he's just like, they profane the temple because they're working in it. And yet they're blameless because God God set it up that way. And so he's going to prove to them, he's like, you guys are missing the whole point. The work is not for what you think. You think you're honoring God by not working, but when you're on mission, that's exactly what it is. You are working, for the Lord, and that kind of thing. And so I thought that was just so cool. He takes the smallest example and then follows it with the largest example, and then shows them the true meaning in the middle. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. And that the other thing is too, is they probably worked harder than everybody else did all week in one day.
Yeah.
Those guys, because they had to process
slaughtered animals. It's heavy lifting.
Yeah, you gotta dead weight. Yeah. And not to mention, here's one tribe having to deal with the sacrifices of all the tribes.
Mhm.
And also, I mean, all the way back to the beginning of 1 Samuel, we see that the priest is somewhat like a pastor, because a pastor is now, because Hannah goes to the priest and asks for prayer, and he gives her counsel, and it's a counseling session. Actually, it's kind of how it is. It's different. It's different in that culture back then than it is now in this culture. But but yeah, I think I think there's that aspect of the ministry, and there's a lot to do. I yeah, I can't remember exactly where I was going with that, but yeah, Josiah, good stuff.
Cool. Yeah. There's a good quote by Charles Spurgeon, Prince of Preachers. He said that it is no small sin to do wrong in order to escape danger, and I thought that was good given David's situation, you know. And again, truth would have served him better, but you know, and I don't think we typically won't realize the effect of what, you know, our sin, you know. It's just like, oh, I'm in danger, I'm gonna sin to do wrong or to escape danger. And usually, you know, you do that, you escape danger, and you're like, okay, got out of it or whatever. And that happened to David at that point. But later on, you know, when he got news that, hey, you know, and sorry, I keep moving to the next chapter, but we'll get there. He gets news later on that, hey, every single one of those priests died. Saul came in and killed them, you know. And then he's just like, oh man, you know. I think if David had stayed there, they probably would have fallen under David's protection, because God wasn't going to allow David to die. He's his anointed king, you know. That wouldn't have happened. He would have faced Saul. Saul would have backed down again, and those people would have been preserved. But
and they had Goliath's sword there too, and they knew what it was, and they knew who killed Goliath.
yeah,
And so he probably had a lot of support there. If he had just told them the truth, then they would have probably not stuck around when Saul came. They probably would have hidden or ran, and they wouldn't have died.
yeah,
And if they had, but because they were thinking, well, David was on assignment from Saul, Saul's showing up, everything's fine. And, you
And
know,
if he told them what was going on, they would have had a chance to flee too.
Yeah.
If David was not going to stay and kept going, they would have had a chance to run. But
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think even the Apostle Paul talks about, you know, should we sin that good may come, and the answer is no. You know, so yeah, I think in application, and I think it's an important application following our topic last week when we talked about Christian ethics, you know, all the more need for discernment when you're dealing with the matters of life, because you know, you could take a verse like that and you're like, okay, I'll never lie. And then the Nazis show up at your door and they're like, are you hiding Jews? And you're like, I cannot lie, you know? And that whole thing where it's just like, no, the right thing is to preserve their life, you know? But you need great discernment, because if you're not careful, you'll do what David did. He's like, well, I'm not preserving anybody's life this time. I'm just getting out of danger. And then that lie turns into a real bad thing. So,
well, and then remember Rahab from Jericho. The Israel sent spies in. Jericho and the peoples around had heard. This is back when Moses is leading Israel out of Egypt, and they come to the Holy Land. Or actually, no, this is Joshua. Sorry, Moses died. Joshua's going in to the Promised Land. They send spies in. 2 of them go to Jericho. They sneak in. Rahab shelters them and helps them escape, and tells the city officials that she doesn't know where I don't know where they are. When she was hiding them at the time. And so, but that was a lie. It was a flat out lie. But because of that, she is actually in the Hall of Faith.
She is
In
David's great grandma.
Yeah.
yeah.
And also one of the, ancestors, because of that, one of the ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah. So,
Yeah. And reading
Yeah.
Hebrews 11, Hall of Faith, is that chapter? I think it is. That's actually the event that the writer of Hebrews points out as the thing that she did by faith
Yep.
was to lie.
Yeah.
How about that? He picked the high point of everybody's career, and hers was that lie, So,
yeah. And so
But she had faith in God that He would protect her.
that was the defining thing. And so there is a bit of context there.
Yeah.
The people of the land knew that there was this giant group of people wandering through the desert, and that there were these miracles and signs and wonders kind of followed them around. I mean, other people, in passing, when you saw a group of 1 million people in tents, millions of people in tents with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, people, they're like, okay, well, I'm gonna go this direction because that's crazy.
I'd imagine the parting of the Red Sea probably made all the local newspapers.
Oh yeah.
Not a small event either.
All the
Which
all the
you can
tablets.
still find the chariots in the water
Yeah.
today.
That's true.
That's actually, sorry, that one's not. That one was falsified.
No, it's not.
No, it is. Yeah.
No, it's not.
Okay, fine. Go look it up. Do your own research.
I literally just watched a video on it.
Yeah, I know, but it was planted. But don't.
They were planted.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Okay, so if very interesting, go to Piratus. Piratus. Anyway, it's Veritas University's. They're really super high level. They deal in archaeology, and then just they're all around really great guys. In fact, Norman Geisler, one of the guys who we're reading our systematic theology shorts. He founded Veritas University, and so one of their main points of emphasis is archaeology. And they had a guy there that's his thing. He takes the classes out on archaeological digs and that kind of thing. And so that was one of the examples of major finds that was brought up in conversation. And he was just like, unfortunately, the guy who found, who broke the news on that one, and he was like, hey, we spotted this and kind of all that thing. He's like a super, super sketchy guy. He's found a lot of things. And anyway, that one was looked into, and at least by his word, he was like, yeah, that one it was placed there by that guy and then discovered. And yeah, so I mean, salt water with metal, it breaks it down in no time. But yeah. Anyway.
Well, yeah.
Sorry to break
Anyway,
the mold,
they knew.
But
knew
hey,
about,
that could be wrong. So go search it.
yeah,
Research
they knew about Israel, and they saw the signs and wonders, and so it was very obvious to some, and very God has a tendency of separating people. Actually, you either have wisdom and are humbled, or you are foolish and are proud. And God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. So on one hand, you have people like Pharaoh who harden their hearts, and then you have other people who go, wow, there's a pillar of fire following at night and a pillar of cloud every day that these people follow around. And even though they are nomadic, everybody that fights them loses. And so it had gotten around. Obviously, Rahab at some point decided the God of this people is the God who exists.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it was that helping the spies got her into the Hall of Faith. It was by faith.
Yeah.
It's just that it proved itself by her sheltering spies.
Yeah. Cool. So
All right. So that's it. Wrapped up. All good.
awesome.
Don't lie.
Don't lie. Unless you need to. Like,
Yeah.
really need to.
Save a life.
All right.
lie.
See you guys.